Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our Curator's Talk on STEM in the Historic House. My name is Mary Lesher. I'm the Programs Manager at Dumbarton House, and I'm going to hand it over to James, who's going to be giving our talk today. We are having some slight technical difficulties. Our slides are cut off a little bit, and I can't quite figure out why. You should still be able to see all the pertinent information, and I can send the slides afterward just to make sure everybody gets all the information they need, and I do apologize for that. So I'm going to mute myself and take myself off the camera and hand it over to James.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the Curator Talk about STEM in the Historic House. My name is James, and I curated the exhibit as part of my internship in 2018 at Dumbarton House. Today I'll be talking about the things we thought about when creating the exhibit and then go into the different sections of the exhibit. So next slide, please. So when you sit down to create an exhibit, there's a lot of things to think about. What do you want the exhibit to be about? And what do you want the point of the exhibit to be? Who is your audience for the exhibit? What objects do you want to use? How do you want to design the exhibit? And one of the most important things to consider is that not everyone is going to approach the exhibit with the same knowledge base and same experiences. As you can see by this cartoon, sometimes things can be interpreted different ways. Therefore, it was important for us to think about the overall theme, audience, objects, and design to create an exhibit that helps our visitors understand the role of STEM in various parts of historic house preservation. Next slide. Now, picking a topic and establishing a theme is usually the first step in creating an exhibit. For our exhibit, we knew we wanted to talk about how science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM, are used in historic house museums. And for our theme, we decided on looking at the various aspects of how that happens. So in the second sentence that you see, that is from our intro panel, and it basically summarizes our theme. The main idea is that there are a variety of ways we use STEM in historic houses, and we wanted to talk about these different techniques and processes. We narrowed down our ideas to about 8 main sections, which I will discuss in a few minutes. Next slide. So another factor we considered at the very start was our audience. Who was this exhibit for? We decided on aiming the exhibit toward school-age children about 8th grade and up, as well as the general public. Also, we wanted the exhibit to reach a broader audience than our past exhibitions that were more historically based. That way, visitors more interested in science, technology, or math could see how these are actually part of historic house museums. Now, deciding on our audience helped us with writing the labels and text panels. This exhibit is about STEM processes, so it can involve a lot of scientific and technological explanation. And so we decided that we wanted to make sure we didn't want to overwhelm people with all of this technical information. We wanted to keep it at about an 8th grade level, an 8th grade reading level, and 8th grade scientific education, so that everyone, all of our visitors, could understand what was going on. Next slide. Deciding what objects to put in the exhibit was one of my favorite parts. The objects help you visually tell a story and show examples. Dumbarton House has a great collection of Federal period decorative arts, as well as photos and sort of explanations of the restoration of the house. So we borrowed from those in terms of the images of the house restorations, and the studies on the house. And we also looked to get loans for this exhibit. And we got loans from different historic houses associated with the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America. We are the national headquarters of the society, and we wanted to borrow objects from other historic houses associated with the Colonial Dames. So here's a map of Great American Treasures, which is actually a new website that was launched recently and tells the story of Colonial Dames properties. So you can check that out and see all of the properties throughout the country and one in England, Sulgrave Manor. Next slide. So when we thought about design of the exhibit, we wanted something that provided a cohesive and modern look because of our topic. We decided on a geometric, almost honeycomb pattern because of its relationship to scientific images like molecular structures. Each letter of STEM has a different color. So science is blue, technology is purple, engineering is orange, mathematics is yellow. These colors are also used throughout the exhibit panels, as you can see in blueprints, surveys, and drawings here. There's sort of a lighter orange color, and it has to be lighter so that the text appears. Also, the honeycomb design is in each panel with the white honeycomb design in the background. Next slide. So now that we've discussed the different things in creating the exhibit, I'm going to dive deeper into the individual sections. So you can see them listed here. I'm not going to read them out because we're going to talk a lot about them, but there are 8 different sections that we decided to focus on. Next slide. So the first section is about architectural blueprints, surveys, and drawings, which help preserve historic houses by accounting for the size, layout, and architectural features of those properties. One of the objects in this section was a copy of a survey map of the Burger and Wright House and Gardens by Lewis Merritt that dates to about the early 1940s. And the Burger and Wright House was built in 1770 and is a colonial Danes property located in Wilmington, North Carolina. Now on this map, you can see the different structures of the property. And in the red box, those are numbers that are showing the elevation of the land. So it's a survey of the property to help people preserving the property and have a record of what's going on there. Next slide. Now, architectural drawings also provide inspiration for architects themselves. So the idea behind this was shown by an image of the McAllister House Museum, which is in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And it was designed by George Summers, built in 1873. Now, Summers was inspired by images and plans of English cottages, like the one in Andrew Jackson Downing's The Architecture of Country Houses that was published in 1850. On the plan in the book, you can see that the author has even provided measurements for each of the rooms within the house and then the exterior architecture of the English style cottage. Next slide. So the second section is about wallpaper reduction, which will be the subject of our craft later on. And most wallpaper that is in historic houses is not the original. There's not a ton of wallpaper that survives in most historic houses. And so you usually get it in small samples. Companies like Adelphi Paper Hangings recreate historic wallpaper using 19th century techniques from these existing historic samples. The main part of this process involves using a wooden block that is covered in paint and then pressed onto the wallpaper. The carvings of these blocks involves detailed measurements to copy the existing designs. Here you can see a wood block that was used to recreate the reproduction wallpaper that is used in the parlor at Dumbarton House, the yellow wallpaper there. And then next to the wood block, we have a historic wallpaper sample on loan from the Van Cortlandt House in New York. And it's based on this sample that Adelphi Paper Hangings created different samples for us to show the process of creating this wallpaper. We do not have the wood block of the Van Cortlandt design because it's copyrighted by Adelphi Paper Hangings and the Van Cortlandt House. So you can also get this design still. It's copyrighted. That means they're still producing it for historic houses and for individual clients. You can check that out on the Adelphi Paper Hangings website for more information and for their full catalog. Next slide. So here are the samples that Adelphi created for us. Sample 1 shows the white paper, the plain paper This paper has a lot more of a almost fabric feel to it than like paper you would use to print things. And then the sample 2 is the base layer, the base coloring. So for this, it's a light or gray blue that you see here. And then sample 3 is going to be the one right next to sample 1 back there with that darker design that is the rosettes. And then sample 4 is another block print that is going to be put on top of sample 3 to create that white pattern. So each color is going to have a different wood block. When you compare the reproduction to the original wallpaper sample, you're going to notice that the reproduction is a lot brighter. And that's because the wallpaper sample has deteriorated over time. Light deteriorates things, especially things on paper like wallpaper. And so when creating these reproductions, the manufacturers are going to look to the original colors. So they're not going to reproduce the colors that are affected by the light. They're going to make these bright, vibrant colors that were actually part of historic houses, especially in the federal period. And a lot of people are surprised at these bright colors. A lot of people, when they visit Dumbarton House, are sort of surprised that they did like bright colors in the federal period. But these really show the accurate colors for museum visitors to sort of keep that in perspective. Also, if you would like to learn more about the process that Adelphi uses, you can look at their video. Their video that shows their production process was part of the exhibit, but I don't have time to show it here. You can see it on their website. Next slide. So once the rolls or sheets are created, they go up on the wall. In most cases, the workers pasted the sheets in a vertical line that you can see in this French print from 1759. And in 18th century, the sheets were individually painted. That's what you see here. They're individually painted and then they're put up in separate sheets. But by the 19th century, the process is becoming more industrialized. And so they're going to create the sheets in a vertical line to start with, and then they're going to print onto that vertical line. So the reproduction wallpaper throughout Dumbarton House was attached to the wall in a similar process with these vertical line sheets. Next slide. Section 3 of the exhibit focuses on paint restoration. So paint conservators need to understand the different chemical makeup and different processes used to create paint pigments of different time periods. Advances in technology such as X-rays or ultraviolet light scans can aid conservators in distinguishing the different layers of paint within a artwork. We use the restoration of a portrait of Joseph Burton in the Dumbarton House collection to show the example of paint restoration. So Patricia Favreau conserved this painting by first removing the exterior varnish and cleaning the work. And then any holes in the painting were filled with fine putty, which you can see in the first picture. That's the tan colored part of the painting. Those she's filling it in, and then she's going to repaint all of those holes using pigments that match the original colors. Finally, she puts a new varnish over the paint, and you can see the completed restoration in the image on the right. You can also see it in the breakfast room at Dumbarton House when we reopen. Next slide. Section 4 explores paint analysis that is used to understand the different layers of paint on the walls, doors, and different parts of historic houses. Here are several tests done actually at Dumbarton House in our parlor. And you can see the first one is actually in visible light. So you can see the different layers of paint. And paint specialists like Susan Buck, who's the one who did this examination of our wall paint, can run tests for different chemicals within the paint layers. So the red that you see on the second image is RHOB. That is a test using a binding protein that amplifies the presence of chemicals. Now, specifically, she's looking for certain oils because depending on the different oils used, that could date the type of paint that was used. These tests can help museums establish what paint or wall covering was on the walls during the time period that they would like to interpret. Next slide, please. Historic and modern frame making is section 5, and this involves precise measurements and chemical combinations to create wooden frames. Eric Tolfsen, who is a frame restorer for the National Gallery of Art, created an interactive wood frame to demonstrate the process of making gilded frames. First, the craftsman would cut a design into the piece of wood. Then the wood would be covered in a gesso, which is a mixture of chalk and gypsum, and then a layer of clay. The final layer is thin sheets of gold called gold leaf. Now, if any of you have ever worked with gold leaf, it's very, very thin. About one small sheet could be maybe about 25 cents. And it's so thin that if you are working and a breeze comes by, it's going to go all over the place. So it's very delicate work. Above the interactive, we have a historic 19th century frame from Dumbarton House collection. So you can see and compare the modern frame, gilded frame to an 19th century version. Next slide. Physics and mathematics are involved in the packing and crating of museum objects, and that's section 6. Manufacturers create custom frames for objects based on the measurements and the weight of the object to protect it during storage and transit. Bonsai Fine Art Services created and donated these crates, which are actually 2 of the garden urns in Dumbarton House collection. Originally, they were in the North Garden. The upper shelf pulls out and it has the finial or the top part, as well as the pedestal. So you can see that there. The main body of the urn is in the lower part, and the base is stored separately. Now, these are for storage and for transport. They can be more complicated than this, and sometimes if you're dealing with different objects or if you're transporting them for a long period of time, there's going to be more padding and other stuff added by the manufacturers. Now, the crates provide a secure way for us to move and store these urns. They are very heavy, trust me. It took 3 of us to move these upstairs for this exhibit. But it would have been a lot harder if they weren't in their crates. And so these crates protect the object and allow us to move them with built-in handles that are actually on the side in the back of the image. These date to about 1869, and they are from London. Next slide. The way 3D scanning, casting, and printing can help visitors, conservators, educators, and curators understand objects is section 7 of the exhibit. Here is an example of a 1770s ceramic figurine from the Wilton House collection that was scanned and 3D printed by Dr. Bernard Means. Dr. Bernard Means runs the Virginia Commonwealth University's virtual curation lab. We got to go down there. We got to go down to Richmond to visit him. It's a very cool space. He has a lot of 3D scanners and printers, and he's working with students to recreate different objects from various museums, mostly throughout Virginia, and he focuses on different histories. He has natural history museums, so different items that are like whale bones and different stuff like that. Now, the 3D scan of the figurine was used by Michelle Erickson, who is a ceramics-based artist who's in Williamsburg, Virginia. And she used this to create her work, 3D Lovers. Now, according to Erickson, quote, "The choice of black and white is meant to visually provoke traditional perceptions of history, of race and gender," end quote. So you can see that they are, these 2 heads are the heads from the 1770s ceramic figurine that she has reproduced and blown up using 3D scanning and technology. So the technology of 3D scanning and printing can help recreate new art inspired by objects in historic houses. Next slide. 3D scanning, casting, and printing also allow museums to reproduce objects so that they can be handled and studied and better understood without damaging the original. For example, this brick from Gunston Hall has the fingerprints of an enslaved worker who made it. So you can see the red circle there, those are the fingerprints. And by 3D scanning and printing this brick, visitors are able to hold the replica of the object and think about its size or the person that made it and what how they were holding it to create the fingerprints. So these 3D objects actually provide tactile connections to the past. Now, what is not shown here is we had a spoon mold that was scanned and used by Dr. Bernard Means to actually create spoons. So that's another way to use this technology. You can use it to show the processes of things that you don't want to damage to create things like spoons. Next section, or next slide. Next slide. There we go. The last section of the exhibit is about the process of X-ray fluorescent that can be used to examine the chemical makeup of historic objects. So what this is they take an X-ray and they're specifically looking for different elements within the object itself. So this camp cup that you see here is from Dumbarton House collection and was thought to be bought by George Washington. In order to see if the metal dates to the right time period for this to be true, the cup was sent to Mount Vernon for an X-ray fluorescent test. The chart that you see is actually the chemical makeup of the metal on the bottom of the cup. And this is near the maker's mark. The big orange spike in the middle there, that is silver, so Ag. But in the 18th century, most silver had traces of gold still in it, and so it wasn't pure silver. The green spikes that are AU are going to be the gold, and that supports the idea that the cup dates to the right time period to have been purchased by George Washington. And we believe that this is one of a set of 8 cups that was made by Richard Humphrey for Washington in 1780. Next slide. So you can still see this exhibit today. This was sort of just an overview. However, this is an abbreviated version of the full exhibit. So when we reopen, you can come and view about 5 existing sections from this exhibit. In terms of reopening, Dumbarton House will reopen to members on July 1st and July 2nd, and then close for the July 4th holiday and be reopened fully to the public on July 5th. So you can check out these exhibits, as well as a newer exhibit that was up before we went into quarantine about alcohol in the federal period. So that's right next door to this one. Next slide. So I want to thank you guys for listening. If you have want to follow us on our social media, you can find out more information about the various exhibits and the various history of Dumbarton House, as well as our opening plan for reopening from COVID-19. So all of that information is there. So now I will open it up to questions if anyone has any.
If anybody has questions, you can put them in the question feature, which should show up on the little control panel along the side. No questions? Okay, well then I will show you the process of making wallpaper that James talked about earlier. So Dumbarton House has in their foyer wallpaper that has 6 different colors in it. And the way that you know if wallpaper was expensive or inexpensive is based on how many colors it has, because every color has to set before you can add the next one. So the more colors you have, the more expensive your wallpaper would have been, because the more labor intensive it was to make it. So today I am making 3-color wallpaper. It's going to be beautiful. I cut up a couple of potatoes. I used a cookie cutter to make these beautiful shapes. And now I am just going through and adding all my different colors to it. And it's not the easiest thing to do. It would be easier if I had a beautiful, precise wood cut panel like James showed us in the exhibit. But this is a fun way to kind of understand the process that they went through. And especially if you think about how big each room is in your house and how long it's going to take to add every single color onto every single sheet of paper or roll of paper that goes into making your wallpaper.
As you guys probably saw on the slide, it's a lot of people doing this for larger houses. But yeah, it would be sort of, you would have a sheet and then connect it like Mary's doing.
Yes, I do have 3 sheets. We're going to see how far I get. I feel like it's boring for you guys to watch me do this. But I have 3 colors of paint. I'm using a very vibrant pink because, as James said, people did like color in the federal period. We don't think of them as being very colorful people, but they were very into vibrant colors. So I'm now going to add a little accent of pink with this little tiny diamond-shaped guy. We're going to see how this goes. Okay, it looks nice. I'm going to do a couple so you guys can get a feel for what the full print is going to look like. I also did not fully let this dry. I didn't give myself quite enough time before the program started. So if the colors bleed, that's why. So do as I say and not as I do. Let's see. I also am going to recommend, I'm just dipping my potato into the paint. I'm going to recommend that you get a brush and you paint it on. I did not thoroughly test this activity before I decided to show it to all of you. So that's what we got so far. Just beautiful little pink guys there. I feel like this can make some excellent wrapping paper. I might not put it actually on my walls, but I will wrap some delightful presents with it. And so that's really just the process. I can show you here, this one has just the first layer, just the white guys. And then you would add your second layer, just the black, and then your pink guys. You let them all dry in between, and then you have gorgeous wallpaper. So I hope all of you, I can't see you because we're on a webinar platform, but I really hope that you're at home cutting up your potatoes and your apples so you can make your own gorgeous designs. If you do decide to do this craft, please send me a picture. I want to see what you guys can do, because mine, I feel like I could do better, but I was nervous. So I didn't get as creative as I could have with the styles and the designs that I made. Does anybody have questions for James or about the exhibit or about this craft? Ooh, we have a question. Let me see. We have a question that says, have you been doing any virtual programming for students? Have we done any field trips based on this exhibit? So all of our programs are based on Common Core standards. We don't make them specifically for individual exhibits. And we have not yet been doing virtual programming for students because teachers had so much on their plates at the end of the school year and as things were wrapping up with quarantine. But we are planning those for the fall, and we're starting to do virtual Girl Scout programs as well. And we can incorporate beautiful tasks like this into all of those programs. And that is definitely something that's kind of up and coming for us. Let me see if I can get this. There we go. We also have somebody asked, I came in a little late. Is there any consideration made for temperature controls in historic houses / collection spaces in the exhibit? James, will have you take that one.
Yeah, so we have an HVAC system and we monitor all of our humidity and temperature control for all of our exhibit spaces and for our collection spaces. So all of that is taken care of to the standards provided by organizations like AAM, the American Alliance of Museums. In terms of sort of thinking about that with exhibits. Whenever you have a loan, you usually have to send a report of your space to the institution that you're working with for that loan. So part of my job was to create that loan paperwork, but also to sit down and to look over our spaces, and there's a report you send out that talks about things like your HVAC system, but also your spaces, the size of your spaces, the size of your walls, the location you are to a fire station. It's important. All of your insurance and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. We also think, James, could you talk a little bit about how things that are in the air, like oxygen or even the temperature of a room, can impact the preservation of an object? Like how can that change like a metal or a paper and degrade it faster or quicker? So we have to use these STEM practices to ensure we don't do that.
Yeah, so in terms of protecting objects, usually things like paper and textiles are going to deteriorate faster from things like light. And so you don't want to expose them that long. And that's why certain places you go, including Dumbarton House, a lot of our paper stuff, like our books and our documents, aren't always going to be on display. They're usually in our temporary exhibits. In terms of the air, the air, and then also I'm going to sort of tie in humans as well. The reason why you can't touch an object is because there's a lot of oils on you. There's a lot of different chemicals on you that if they get onto an object, especially silver, they can damage it pretty quickly. So silver, I've seen some silver that hasn't necessarily, not in Dumbarton House collection, don't worry, but I have seen some silver that hasn't been necessarily protected that well, and you can see the thumbprint from someone who has just been handling it with their bare hands. And that's just from the natural oils in our skin getting onto the objects.
Let's see, do we have any other questions? We had one comment that they love the idea for this exhibit and look at preservation in the field. They want to come see it in person. We would love to have you. We are going to be opening, like James said, to members on July 1st and 2nd from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then we're opening to the general public the following week, which would be July 6th, I believe. 7th. Sorry, we open on Tuesday. We're not open on Monday. So we will be open from then to the public. And then, of course, seeing how things go with COVID-19 in the DC area and opening and closing according to DC statutes as necessary. But we really look forward to having people back in the house. It's going to be nice to share our exhibits and our space with people again. And we do have our grounds open from dawn to dusk every day. There's free Wi-Fi on our grounds. So even if the building is not open, you can always go hang out in our gardens and enjoy. I'm almost done with this beautiful wallpaper print. You'll be able to see all 3 steps of the process. I'm very excited. It's coming along nicely. Just have a few more stamps I gotta make here. I will say I'm definitely learning as I go. It's getting better over time. So maybe practice with something you don't care about that much. I just make up a print that you don't care if you mess it up, because then you'll be disappointed.
Everyone starts as an apprentice.
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
That is a good call, James. I'm definitely a wallpaper apprentice. Let's see. I'm also not being as strategic as I should in making this. I would not make a good wallpaper maker. It's a good thing I'm in programs.
I will mention, if you're in other parts of the country, do check out Great American Treasures, because you might be near a museum associated with colonial dames, and they are also in the process of reopening. So every time the people in our institution that knows about those reopenings, they'll post it on that social media.
Absolutely. Okay, so here we have our base layer. That's what it first looked like. Gorgeous, just our beautiful white flower shapes. And then Add it in black to make a checkerboard kind of pattern with the flowers. And then the kicker, these beautiful pink diamonds. So this would be a fairly, if this was actually nice and well done, this would be a fairly expensive wallpaper because it has a very bright color and it has 3 layers. The most common wallpapers that like everyday people who didn't live in fancy houses would have had would either have been small flowers or check patterns with 1 or 2 colors that were made on lesser quality paper that had a whole lot of different, like they were used in every house. It wasn't like at Dumbarton House, we have this very fancy, very special wallpaper that's kind of specific to us. But you could commission your own wallpaper, but for a lot of people, they just had something basic that you would find in a lot of homes. So this is fancy, but we can also make something more everyday. And I do appreciate somebody commented how pretty it is. Thank you very much. It was fun to make. I just had some old potatoes in my cupboard and I thought that would be a good way to show you guys the process of wallpaper making. So not as exciting as actual wallpaper. And I will send out after the fact, I'll send you guys the link to the video of Adelphi Wallpaper actually making the wallpaper and installing it at Dumbarton House because it's really cool to watch. It's very mesmerizing, especially if you're like me and you enjoy watching. It's so organized and it's so methodical. It's very hypnotizing. You need to calm down. You throw that bad boy on, do some breathing exercises. It's a good way to calm yourself. Highly recommend.